Children of the Longhouse by Joseph Bruchek. Chapter 1. Grabber's Plan. His hands pressed on the hard earth of the hillside. Ohkwa'ri felt the footfalls of people coming before he heard or saw them. He leaned forward and looked through the branches of the shrub oak, which were green with leaves. Several people were coming up the trail. He recognized the one who led them. It was Grabber. From his shaded hiding place where he had dug out the loose earth under a slanting slab of stone, Ohkwa'ri could see out through the branches and not be seen. He had crawled in to get out of the hot noon rays of the bright sun of the strawberry moon, that time of the year when the days are the longest. This hiding place was his own and no one else's. The little cave and the hill on the other side of the river from his busy village were the two spots where he always came to think. No one knew about this cave except for his sister Otistia, whom he trusted with everything. Ohkwa'ri thought to crawl out, but for some reason, though his mind thought of showing himself, his body held back. Then Grabber began to speak to his friends, and Ohkwa'ri knew that it was good he had not allowed himself to be seen. The things that Grabber was saying, here on the hillside far above their village, were not things that he wanted anyone to overhear. Grabber was talking about starting a war. When Ohkwa'ri was very small, he had admired Grabber, who was 5 winters older than him. Grabber was straight-limbed and very strong. He was the fastest runner of all the young men, a hard worker, and a good hunter. He was the best at all of the games the young men played. Whether it was the game of Dequarathon in the spring, when they caught the hard deerskin ball in their web sticks and ran back and forth on the playing field to score goals, or Snowsnake in the winter, when they threw their long, finely carved spears down an ice trough to watch them skitter great distances, Grabber was almost always the first among the young men. Because of that, he had a loyal group of close friends, and he was always praised for his abilities. Now that Ohkwa'ri had seen 11 winters, he no longer admired Grabber in the same way. Despite his physical abilities, Grabber was impatient. Although he usually won, he sulked on the few times when he lost. He often had an angry look on his face, and he did not listen well to the advice of the older men. He always thought his own way of doing things for the good of the people was the best. "Those Anantoks," Grabber was saying, "those eaters of bark are not real men. They are cowards. We are real human beings. If our fathers and our uncles were not too old and tired, they would see this clearly." "That is true," said Greasy Hair. Greasy Hair was always at Grabber's side, ready to do whatever his friend suggested. A small village of the Anantoks was just over the mountain pass, 3 days' journey upriver from the big falls, and then an equal number of days' journey up the big lakes. Although there were more Anantoks in all their scattered villages than there were Longhouse people, the Anantok villages were often quite small, smaller than those of the Longhouse people, and thus easier to raid. "We should raid them," Grabber said, "because they have not traded fairly with us." Even though Grabber's statement was not true, Greasy Hair agreed loudly. "Hey," he said. "When will we make the raid on their village?" asked a third person's voice. From his hiding place under the shelf of rock, Ohkwa'ri could not see that person. Grabber was sitting right in front of the cave, and his back blocked Ohkwa'ri's view of the others. But he recognized the slow, growling voice. It was Eats Like a Bear, the biggest of all the young men in the village, and another of Grabber's 3 constant companions. Now, Ohkwa'ri thought, Falls-a-Lot will ask that same question if he is also here. Sure enough, the next voice to speak was that of the rather slow-thinking young man, who almost always repeated the same questions asked by his friends. "Yes," said the voice of Falls-a-Lot. "When will we make the raid on their village?" Grabber looked around. For a moment his eyes rested on the hidden entrance of the cave, and Ohkwa'ri's heart beat faster. Ohkwa'ri remembered a story that Otistia had told him during the winter. The story of a boy who accidentally overheard a group of two-hearted people who had made an old man sick through their bad magic. The two-hearted people did not see that boy hidden in the spruce tree, Ohkwa'ri thought. So Grabber will not see me here. He will look away. Grabber looked back towards his friends. We will make the raid while the festival to thank the strawberries is going on. While the people are dancing, we will strike the enemy. When the 4 young men had gone back down the hill, Ohkwa'ri came out of his cave. He was very troubled by the words they had spoken. It was true that the Anantaks were a different nation. It was true that they spoke a language strange to the people of the Flint Nation. But it was also true that they were now at peace. Once the Anantaks had been their enemies, but now the people of the Flint Nation often traded with them. Each year after the corn harvest, people from Ohkwa'ri's village would travel to the meeting place on the other side of the big south-flowing river, Skanada de Gahunda, the river beyond the openings. One thing in particular that they liked were the fine canoes of birch bark made by the Anantaks. In the old days before meeting the Anantaks, the canoes of the 5 nations of the Longhouse people had always been made of elm bark. The Anantaks taught them how to make birch bark canoes. Yet even though they knew how to make canoes of birch bark, it seemed as if the most beautiful and the fastest canoes were always those made by the Anantak people themselves. Although they would never be as close to Ohkwa'ri's people as the 4 nations, which, with his Flint Nation people, made up their great league of peace, the Anantaks respected the people of the Flint Nation and honored the peace. Until now, all the people of the Flint Nation had returned that respect and kept that peace. Ohkwa'ri thought he understood why those 3 other young men were in agreement with Grabber's plan. They were impatient. They had not been successful in gaining the respect they thought they deserved. It seemed clear that none of them would ever be a loiane, a leader of men, or a faith keeper. Nor was it likely that any of them would ever become a pine tree chief, chosen to sit in council with the loiane. There was no sign that Grabber or any of the others who followed his lead were wise enough or careful enough to hold such a position of honor. So they had decided to make their names by doing great deeds in a war that no one else wanted. The words that Grabber had spoken continued to trouble Ohkwa'ri as he walked across the hill toward the strawberry fields, where he knew his sister and the other women would still be gathering berries. The festival to thank the strawberries would begin the next morning. His own first impulse was to find the 4 larger boys and confront them. He would tell Grabber and his friends that their hot-headed idea was wrong. No one should break the Great Peace without a good reason, or go to war without the agreement of all the people. But then Ohkwa'ri remembered what his twin sister had told him just the day before. "Brother," Otistia had said, "you must sometimes think before you do things." Otistia understood things better than he did. He had trusted her thoughts before, and he would do so now. The strawberry fields were a wide expanse of meadow not far from the river. The people kept that area clear by burning it each autumn before the snows returned. As a result, there were always many strawberry plants. At this time of the year, those red berries, each shaped like a little heart, glowed like embers in the new grass. There were many girls and women still picking, although Ohkwa'ri could see that some were already heading back up the trail to the big longhouse, carrying baskets that had been filled with many berries. It was easy to locate Otistia. As soon as Ohkwa'ri had come to the edge of the fields, she looked up and raised a hand in greeting. Because they were twins, they always seemed to be able to find each other. It was that way, Heron's Flying explained to them, because their minds had started their journey together even before they were born. They would always be close to each other, on whatever road they traveled. Because Heron's flying was their mother, the twins knew that her words were surely true. Although Ohkwa'ri was a finger-width taller and more muscular than his sister, and although her face was a bit more delicate than his, they looked like reflections of each other. Ohkwa'ri walked carefully across the field, making sure not to step on any of the berries. The strawberries were everywhere, the three-leaf stalks raising up thick clusters of green and red berries. He knelt down by his sister. He saw that she was almost through picking. Her basket, which she had made from a large piece of elm bark, folded up on the sides and then sewn together with the stringy inner bark of the basswood, was almost filled to the brim with berries. But not every berry found its way into the basket. Her mouth was almost as stained with berry juice as were her fingers. Otistia looked at Ohkwa'ri as if reading her brother's thoughts. She held out a double handful of berries to him. "Here, brother," she said. "These may bring a smile to your face." Ohkwa'ri took the berries and began to eat them. They were as warm and sweet as the scented breeze that was blowing across the fields. But he did not smile as he ate them. He was too deeply troubled. Otistia studied his face. "Will you tell me what is bothering you, or do I have to guess?" she said with a smile. Ohkwa'ri looked around. No one was close enough to hear what he and his sister were saying. "It is Grabber," he said. "He and his followers are planning to make a raid." Otistia's smile vanished. She put down her basket of berries and leaned closer to Ohkwa'ri. "Tell me how you know this, brother," she said. Ohkwa'ri told her what he had heard while in his cave on the hill. He felt much better as he told it to his sister. She was better at thinking about such things. "I understand," Otistia said when he finished. "You were right not to confront them. This time you thought before acting, and that is good. Sometimes things happen that you do not expect. Grabber is so hot-headed that he and his friends would have beaten you badly and left you on the hillside. Then they would have gone on their raid before anyone could stop them. Now we must go and tell our grandmother. She will know what to do." Their grandmother, She Opens the Sky, was the oldest of the 3 clan mothers of the big Longhouse. As the oldest woman of the Bear clan, it was her job to help everyone follow the right path. Everyone respected her for the even-tempered way in which she did this. As clan mother, she was one of those who chose the clan's leaders. Those good men, those loiane, would represent the people who made up their village, not only in their councils with the other 2 clans of the Flint Nation, but also in the great meeting of their League of 5 Nations, which took place in Onondaga. There are the 50 men, each chosen by a clan mother, each chosen to speak for peace, to keep good minds as they spoke, would gather around the central council fire. The names of the loiane were always kept within their clans and passed on when they died or gave up their office. These men could never go to war, never kill another human being, never steal. If any of them ever did so, they would lose their position, and their name would be given to someone else. There were always 50. It had been that way since the founding of the League of Peace. Of those 50 men leaders who maintained their League of Peace, 9 came from the Flint people. And of those 9, 3 came from the Bear clan. Their mother's brother, Shoskoharawane, the big tree, was one of those 3 loiane. She Opens the Sky was sitting outside the great longhouse when Ohkwa'ri and Otistia found her. She was making the strawberry drink that would be shared the following day during the Thanksgiving. As a clan mother, one of her responsibilities was to see that the people of the village were well fed during the times of ceremony. She did not stop crushing the red berries with her wooden pestle, but she listened closely to the words the two young people spoke. Wahi, she said when they finished. It is good that you told me this. She looked into Ohkwa'ri's face. Will you repeat your words in front of Grabber and his followers? Hank, Ohkwa'ri said without hesitation. Yes, grandmother. That is good, grandson, She Opens the Sky said. Now go, and tell your Uncle Big Tree that I wish to speak with him. The sun was only the width of 2 hands away from the end of the day when the council meeting was called to discuss the matter. It was held outside, beneath the great oak tree that grew at the edge of the field downriver from the great Longhouse. The 3 Loiane sat together on one side of the fire, with Ohkwa'ri next to them. Grabber and his 3 friends stood in front of them on the other side of the fire. In a great circle all around them, the many people of the village were gathered. Of the 4 young men who had planned to start a war, only Grabber still looked defiant. Eats Like a Bear looked as if he had eaten something that made him sick. Greasy Hair had a look on his face like that of a rabbit who has suddenly seen a fox. And Falzalat's knees were shaking. Grabber, though, stood straight and tall. Looking at Grabber, Ohkwa'ri found that he still had some admiration for the older youth. Grabber did not have any sisters who could help him learn patience. Grabber's father had been killed while on a raid when Grabber was a small boy. Because Grabber had no uncles, he did not have any close male relative to help him learn how to be a man. Perhaps, Ohkwa'ri thought, that is why Grabber is always trying so hard to be the best at everything. Ohkwa'ri, a voice said. Ohkwa'ri turned to see who had spoken. It was his father, Dagaheoga, the one who has 2 ideas. 2 Ideas was one of the men who acted as a war captain when it was necessary for the people to fight. He was sitting with the Loiane at this meeting because it concerned the threat of war. It is your turn to tell what you heard, 2 Ideas said. Ohkwa'ri stood and took a deep breath. When I was on the hill back there, Grabber came with his companions. They sat down to talk of a plan. They did not see me. Their plan was to make a raid on the village of the Anantak people. They planned to do this tomorrow while the people were dancing. I saw Grabber, and I heard the voices of his friends, Eats Like a Bear, Greasy Hair, and Falzalat. Those 4 were the ones who agreed to go to war. Big Tree looked at the 4 young men who still stood on the other side of the fire. Only Grabber looked back at him. I ask you, Big Tree said, is this true? Grabber lifted his chin up and spoke in a loud voice. It is true, he said. Although his voice shook slightly, his words were spoken clearly. Once again, Ohkwa'ri felt admiration for Grabber. He would not deny his plans. Honor was too important to him, and it was to win honor for himself as a leader in battle that he had thought to make his foolhardy raid. Hear me, you young men, Big Tree said. Your plan to make a raid was foolish in many ways. It was foolish because you have no experience in war, and it is likely that some or all of you would have been hurt or even killed. Those Anantak people are good fighters. It was also foolish because such a raid would have angered the Anantaks. They would have raided us in return, and innocent people in our village would have suffered. We are at peace with the Anantaks now, and because this is a peace that we made with them, it would seem that we have no honor if we were to be the ones to break that peace. But the most foolish thing about your plans was this. Big Tree paused and waited, until one by one the 3 other young men raised their heads to look at him. The most foolish thing, he continued, was that you planned this raid on your own. Have you never heard it said that the path to war must first go through the lodge of peace? This is always our way. Our clan mothers and the Loeane must always be consulted first, and then all of the people must agree. Big Tree looked over to the place where She Opens the Sky sat with the other elder women. She gestured for Big Tree to continue. His words were expressing the thoughts of the clan mothers. Now, Big Tree said, since you thought to go to war, here are war captain. He looked over at Two Ideas and then sat down. When Two Ideas stood, Ohkwa'ri felt proud of his father. Two Ideas was not as tall as Big Tree, but he was broader and more muscular. Although he walked and spoke more slowly than Big Tree, Two Ideas could move quickly when he wanted, as quickly as a snapping turtle shooting its head out of its shell. And when Two Ideas grabbed a hold of something, he did not let it go. That was also why he was such a good hunter. Whenever he started out on the trail, he would not give up until he caught the game he was after. Two Ideas walked slowly toward the four young men. He held his fighting club in his right hand. That club was a terrible weapon, and was usually kept stored in the elm bark box under his bed in the big longhouse. The end of its curved handle, which was the length of a man's forearm, was carved into a ball the size of a fist. The ball of the club was perfectly round except for one sharp point, carved like a tooth, on the striking face of the club. As was the custom, Two Ideas had named his club. He called it Ohkwa'ri, the tooth. A club like that could crack open a man's head as easily as a squirrel's tooth could break an acorn. As Two Ideas came close to the four young men, he began to spin his club, switching it from one hand to the other as he did so. His hands moved lazily, but the club made a whistling noise as it spun. Eats Like a Bear looked very sick to his stomach now, and Greasy Hair was making a small whimpering noise. Falls-a-Lot looked as if he could be pushed over by the smallest breeze. As before, only Grabber continued to stand up straight, but the look on his face was no longer so defiant. Two Ideas stopped. His eyes went from one of the young men to the next. In turn, each of them looked down at the ground, even Grabber. Two Ideas nodded and started to turn away. Then, so quickly that Ohkwa'ri hardly saw him move, even though he had sensed what was to happen next, Two Ideas spun, grabbed Eats Like a Bear by the throat, and with a piercing cry swung the tooth down, stopping it only a finger's width from the huge young man's forehead. Eats Like a Bear put up his hands and fell down on his knees, but Two Ideas had already stepped back. That is what it means to go to war, Two Ideas said. Then he cradled his war club in his arm, walked back to his place, and sat down again. The council ended soon after that. As was their way, the leaders had not told those four young men what to do and what not to do. They explained to them why their plan was not a good one, and they showed them what the consequences of their actions might be. Big Tree stood again and looked at the four young men, who were now badly shaken. Hear me, all of the people, Big Tree said. These four young men are foolish, but they are also brave. They may still do good things for our people. In the past, it has been our custom to send into exile those who do not listen, who do things that bring danger to the people. That was our custom, and it is still our custom to this day. So we will continue to watch these young men, and we will look for them to do good things for all the people. Naho, I have spoken.